This is our scheduled time, so that somebody else might show up, we'll facilitate them. But I will open the council work session, joint work session with the planning commission and that committee, I believe.
DRB.
DRB, sorry.
Planning, yeah.
So this is expanded body. So that's going to be topic number 1. I need an approval of the agenda. So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Don't have any consent to work with, so we'll go straight to public comment. Let's see if any of our attendees have a hand up. Don't see any hands up. Anybody in the audience? So we will move on to our discussion. And I will welcome people I haven't seen for a while, actually, from the other committees. Good to see you. You want to get us started?
Sure. First of all, thank you, everybody, for coming. I'd like to start it by going around the room and everybody saying who they are. You probably do know yourselves, but good for posterity to be able to go ahead and see that. So the record, my name is Bruce St. Dennis, and I'm the city manager. And
my name is Alicia Blaylock, and I'm on the design review board.
Dave Doring, Design Review Board.
You did?
No.
Should we ask the people on Zoom to mute themselves maybe until they're ready to speak?
I'll ask, folks that are on Zoom, would you mute yourself until you're ready to talk? We're kind of picking up all the conversations. Thank you. Dave, did you?
Daryl, I believe you're next.
Okay, Daryl Johnson, Chairman of the Planning Commission. And I don't go by Hank anymore.
That's too darn. Nancy McCarthy, member of the City Council.
And I'm Mike Benefield, City Council. Mayor Sam.
Robin Mersley, City Council.
Brandon Ogilvy, City Council.
Barb Knott, Planning Commission. On Zoom.
Would you say who you are?
Jennifer Barrett, Recorder.
Yeah.
And I'm Marcy McAnally with Herbs Works.
Jeff Adams, Community Development Director. And start with Lisa.
Lisa.
Unmute.
Lisa Kerr with Planning Commission, and I can't even see the woman from Herbs Works. I can't even see her on my screen.
Yeah, Rusty, we're going to be able to use the other camera.
Would she raise her hand? So, okay, hello, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Clay.
I'm Clay Newton. I'm on the Planning Commission.
Mr. Burke.
Go ahead. I unmuted you. Go ahead.
Okay,
Tell them who you are.
I'm Joe Burnt. I'm on the Planning Commission.
Joe.
Charles Bennett, Planning Commission.
Do you know, mute yourself and unmute
Right.
yourself?
Mike Morgan, Design Review Board.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're here gathering at a pretty important time in the history of Cannon Beach. We have reached a point.
Okay, it's fine.
Can you mute? Yeah. Right, we've reached a point, I think everybody is seeing it, that we've reached a limited number of readily buildable lots. And what that tends to happen is that we find that we're having more complicated construction on lots that ought to be unbuildable. It also seems to be that like we seem, the thought is that we're seeing more and more of it. And that is actually playing out. If you go back to 2014, 15, we had 75 building permits. We had around that number until it jumped some in 2018, 19 to 115. Okay. 2019, 20, we doubled that to 226. And in 2021, we tripled the 115 to 344. These are all building permits. So we are seeing more, and we're seeing in more complicated places, in places we wouldn't normally have thought to see these things. When you have a lack of buildable lots, you start either dealing with complicated construction on lots thought to be unbuildable previously, or you will see clearing of houses from desirable lots that already have structures on them. And I think, we were talking about who's here, the combining of the council, planning commission, and DRB, and the experience that all you individuals bring creates a strong group to sort out the way Cannon Beach can get ready for what's coming. So that's my comments.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, Alex?
No, I just said thanks, Bruce.
All right, Jeff Adams, Community Development Director. And can I share screen? Because I get to do a PowerPoint. It's the only thing, the only reason I'm here, actually. I did want to touch on kind of the background introduction to this. I've been here almost 3 years now. And as Bruce pointed out, I've only seen more and more development, growing development. And we're seeing this across the nation, not just in Cannon Beach. So this is something that we're seeing across coast to coast, but it's really impacting our areas, coastal areas, and COVID, I think, has got to be part of this scenario that we're seeing, and it's changing a lot of the things that the dynamics of where people are living and what they're wanting to, where they're wanting to spend their time and how to spend it. I began this discussion. I don't know if many people recall, almost the very first 6 months I was here, we gathered around small round tables in this room, the first joint session towards this project. But it comes from the comprehensive plan. And it comes from this gap. I'm calling it minding the gap. There's this gap between what the comprehensive plan says, or at least we perceive it to say, and then also how it gets translated down to this zoning codes and development codes. There we go. Okay.
There we go. One too many.
That's what it is. Okay. And so I pointed this out in the first discussion we had a couple years ago, that these are the citations in the comprehensive plan and how often they've been updated. And as you can see, in 1979, when it was first put in there, that's the big, there's this of the comprehensive plan. Language comes from that 1979. It's been amended in a couple major changes in the 80s and 90s. It really hasn't been dealt with since then. I came back with you about a year later and said, here's the process I was considering, the vision, comprehensive plan, strategic plan, ordinance, and gave kind of a cost estimate at the time. We've decided to scale that back, do a code audit 2021, and then move into ordinance revisions probably in about another year from now. So I think it's more about not just minding gaps, but it's identifying the gaps. And that's why we've chosen to do this code audit. It's to look at all the various codes that come into play that translate into what we see and experience in Cannon Beach. And I like to look, I got this little shot here at CRISPR and what goes on with DNA and RNA and code, because really that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with This is an example. I don't know if you remember our hoarding management plan, and I think Bill Weisman showed this one. It shows all the different jurisdictions that are at play when you do something along the ocean front. It's every day in our development codes as well. I mean, we have wetland jurisdictions that are federally and state jurisdictions. We have various codes that we deal with in every project that I pretty much see. We have state planning goals, and those planning goals trickle down into the language that's before you in zoning codes and design review and other things. And so each one of these is to identify these gaps that, hey, we have this comprehensive plan at 30,000 foot level, but how's that playing out in what we see and interact with every day in our community? And so one of those terms that comes so loaded in our language and what we use here in the city of Cannon Beach, we talk about our historic cottages and preserving the historic character of Cannon Beach. There's only 4 instances in the comprehensive plan where the word historic is used. It's only used really in the context where we talk about historic one time, and that says the city in conjunction with the Cannon Beach Historic Society should establish a voluntary program for protecting buildings with local historic merit. We haven't done that. There hasn't been any kind of code written for historic preservation. The other term that comes, I think it's when that pops up, it kind of might have to. There we go. The other term that we throw around and use quite a bit is village. Village is only used twice in the comprehensive plan. It has 4 instances, but it's only really in 2 phrases. And these are those. And so when we talk about the village aesthetic and what that means, we really never define it. And it really only appears twice in the entire comprehensive plan. How does that play out in our actual language of our zoning code? Well, for single family homes, it really can only play out through architectural design elements. And that's the one thing in our code for single family homes. And the majority of our infrastructure is single family homes. This is the only place where we talk about those kind of design elements and what a village scale could be in a village character. Floor area ratio, lot coverage, those are the other 2 that define scale in most of our architecture and design. And if you read floor area ratio, it depends on this thing called gross floor area. I defy anyone to make sense of lot coverage and gross floor area. It's some of the most tortured language in our building code, and one of the things that's on my wish list that Mark can look into and help us with. These are 2 things that are kind of the linchpins of our zoning code for pretty much 90% of our inventory. And it's the key of our success going forward to try to define those better and to work with those better. Because really, if you're wanting to look at village character, historic cottages, the aesthetics of the village, these are the things that we have to talk about, because that's what we look at when we do the standards and we look at the design review. Our design review process is guided by 3 different bodies: the City Council, the Planning Commission, the Design Review Board. Thank you all for attending. And these joint work sessions to me are the key to these kind of big, decisive decisions that we make as a city, because they bring together each one of the different pieces of the puzzle that overlap and work together to get what we work with daily. City Council does mainly the appeals or amendments or the major legislative decisions or things the Planning Commission to get appealed from the Planning Commission, those decisions. Planning Commission does mainly our land use actions, this conditional use permits, zoning changes, zoning amendments. They do any subdivisions that come through. They do the main heavy lifting of our land use ordinances. The Design Review Board, under the way our current legislation reads, do all new construction or new development except for single family residences mobile home, modular home, and their accessory structures. And then it goes on to say, any exterior alteration to an existing non-residential use, except for alterations which are determined to be minor. And then C, D, and E, which trickle down into public improvements. So really, they do pretty much everything but those single-family homes currently. I have gone before the DRB with a couple of workshops over the last couple of years talking about updating the DRB language. When we started to discuss that with the Planning Commission, City Council, the DRB, that's what's led us here to today. Currently, it's divided into major, minor, and that's really the discretion for the minor goes to the DRB chair. That language breaks it down to, like I said, all new construction and then those alterations, and then the minor and insignificant change in the approved plan, and then it gives some examples of those. That language lives in 1744, 110. And when at the DRB level in our work sessions, we've even gone down to looking at how is it actually working? What types of things are actually at a granular level? What are we seeing as minors and what the number of those are? And then what are majors? And so like in new accessory dwelling units, in our language, any new accessory dwelling unit that goes before the DRB. Should it? That's something that will be considered as part of this process. Same thing with signage and other things like that. And so the questions that were before the DRB at our work session leading up to this code audit, I asked them about those kind of things. You know, what's the applicability? Should the DRB be expanded to look at different types of things? Hey, maybe by different locations or other things. So if we were looking at different types, should it be all commercial? Should they look at all multifamily unit, all accessory dwelling units, all single family duplex? You know, which by type should they be looking at? Or should it be done by location? Or like the presidentials, for instance, or by corridor? DRB felt, you know, the major corridors, Hemlock, for instance, or by thoroughfare. Do we label it by primary streets, arterial, and things like that, and look at certain things in certain areas? But it could be size, it could be historic, it could be these things, and that's what this code audit process will allow us to do. Is kind of investigate this, and you know what, through our processes, through what boards, what should be handled at what degree of granularity. As Bruce said earlier, what brought this up was this oncoming tsunami of growth, and with that, the limitations of our footprint. Second, the change in these character of design, the village aesthetic, which is always said. What is that village aesthetic? Is it being threatened right now? Three, and building on more and more challenging lots. So the limited footprint means that as those easy sites are built on, now every site, every one that comes into my office, it has trees, it has streams, it has wetlands, it has steep slopes, it has soils. I can go on, and it's like a Rubik's Cube of difficulty. And with that, it's not simply that we've increased 3 times in how many that are coming through the hose, but they're more difficult projects. Each one of them are more difficult, and they have different levels. I'm dealing with state, I'm dealing with the feds, and with that, slower process. The elephant in the room is that with each one of those, we have something that's hanging out there. I listened to the meeting last night, and someone said their jaw dropped with a loss in population of 14%. Well, the elephant in the room is that we're losing population, but we're also not supplying affordable housing. That every one of those things I talked about, streams, wetland, price of land, all of that is increasing. This is going to get more and more difficult every time we come here. And it's going to take many tools to solve this kind of thing. But I'll refer to the strategic plan that was done, I think, 3 years ago when you discussed it at your retreat. And they had set the goal at 25, I think, units by 2018 and an additional 25 by 2020. We've done 8 since I've been here. And that was because a building burnt down and we rebuilt. And so we're collecting 1% sales tax, and that elephant in the room is getting larger and larger in a small footprint. We need to talk about these things as a whole, in a holistic system. And we also need to look outside the box as well and work with partners, regional partners, to solve these kind of issues. So the city council sent to the planning commission 3 major things. They said, okay, if we're going to do a code audit and we're going to go down this road, this will likely take at least a year and a half to do the code audit. It might take another year and a half to get workable zone and adopted zoning language out of it that will have an impact. So what can we expedite and put through to solve those 3 major points? The combination and recombination of lots, limiting size through floor area and lot coverage, tweaking that ratio, and striking the planned development option in the ordinance. It came before the planning commission at a work session, and they asked to add 2 other things: restricting home sizes in all residential districts to 3,500 square feet of gross floor area, and limiting building heights along the oceanfront to 14-foot average, 18-foot peak, when it's currently 24-foot average, 28 peak. And so we've got that language ready to go. The one thing that I would ask out of this work session tonight is to have a discussion. Do we go down the 2-track and 1 expedited process? And if so, do we add this 4th and 5th as part of that language? Will that successfully expedite or not? The thought is, the one thing that I want to bring out is that with each one of those things that you add, it complicates, just like when I look at it and it's got a stream or wetland or whatever, it's going to complicate, it's going to add more and more discussion. And so if we are on track to go to public notice for October, at least through DLCDC notice, as the first public hearing on the expedited track, which were the original 3. So I need to know, due to public notice, fairly soon where we want to go for that October meeting. If we want to still hold that as a track 1 first public hearing, planning commission, or do we want to reconsider that? So I'll turn it over to Marcy. I first want to thank everyone for being part of this. I think it's going to be monumental for the city. I think it is. If we're wanting to keep the Cannon Beach the special place it is, this will be our opportunity. So thank you guys for having Marcy and having our board lead.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Whenever you bring a consultant into an important meeting like this, you want to make sure that it's somebody that's going to be prepared. And please note that Marcy brought a helmet. Nothing else. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay. I have a presentation too. And I'm actually going to stand up because I think my voice projects better. If I do that, then I'm kind of handicapped with this mask. I'm Marcy McAnally with Works, and I am, we're just kicking off this code audit right now, the last month and a half. And I have a little bit more of a team behind me back in Portland and, but we agreed to do this meeting in person, and I do really appreciate having the opportunity to speak to members of the Planning Commission and the Design Review Board together. So thank you again for coming. I've interviewed 9 of you over the last 3 weeks, and I wanted to just give a little rundown about what I've heard. So if we could go to the next slide, please. 9 individuals somewhat randomly from the City Council, Planning Commission, and Design Review Board, and I'm also open, for more of these interviews to take place. So if you want to talk to me, just ask. So next, please. I came away with a lot of uniform feedback from people. Everybody I spoke to talked about how Cannon Beach is a very special place because of the landscape and the location. And that's something that has either been cultivated, it has formed the city, it has generated kind of an aesthetic, and it's also been nurtured as an aesthetic to the buildings, the way the buildings are sited, the way the city runs so skinny north-south, and that it's been that there's also a history, the cabins that belong to the loggers, and then the artist community, and the unique physical environment sort of pushed the buildings to take on certain forms and be sited in a certain way. And people always mentioned the word village character. So I tended to ask them what did they mean when they were talking about the village, a village. And people talked equally about the physical characteristics of a village, small buildings, generally house-like forms. Sometimes the exterior materials was mentioned, and that a lot of people talked about is having an East Coast kind of Cape Cod type character, largely residential, but obviously acknowledging that it has a very important commercial core. But if you could go to the next slide, please. People also talked to me about the village being people. And I was really impressed with everyone that I spoke to so far has served on multiple boards, whether it's the farmers market, or they were a city councilor before on the DRB, or they were a planning commissioner and now they're on the city council, or they people seem to be really dedicated to serving the community and motivated to keep the community's character through their service. So when I talk to groups and cities, when I work in cities like this on projects like this, I'm always looking for the human power behind the code. The code audit is technically just about changing the regulations and also tightening up the way that the different boards and commissions work together. It's a legislative thing mostly, but it only works if people are behind it, if there are people kind of there to do the work. And it's clear to me that in this place, you have that dedicated population. It's very impressive. So if we could actually skip 2 slides, Rusty, and go to this one, right? Yeah, thank you. So go back one. These are a couple of the words that people used when they talk to me. Soul. Cannon Beach has a soul. That's really moving because it is, to me, as an urban designer and an architect, when we get to work in a place that's so unique in its physical character, it's just really inspiring. And Cannon Beach has that. Village was mentioned by almost everybody in different ways. Someone talked about loved cabins, which I think might be kind of a way of describing the house forms and the kind of texture of neighborhoods. That is a place that's sandwiched between the forest and the ocean, which is kind of significant. It's landlocked, which is both a plus and a minus, and it's an incredibly unique place. And Ben, if you could go to the next slide, please. When I interviewed for this project, and actually when I wrote the letter for the proposal, I wrote about how I have actually worked here before. I worked here when Reimar Bartel was the planning director. And I worked on, some of you might remember this project that was a state grant funded project to look at parking and the parking lot. And this was in the mid 2000s. And that was another experience where I realized, wow, the people of Cannon Beach, they're amazing. So when I wrote the letter for this project, I said, I think this is an iconic place. When I think of Cannon Beach, I kind of think of this New Yorker cartoon. It's like Haystack Rock out there, kind of deserves to be in that horizon that Saul Steinberg's looking at from his Ninth Avenue office at the New Yorker magazine. He's looking across the country, and he's got these rocks kind of in the Pacific Ocean. And I always thought Cannon Beach is so iconic as a place, having these physical forms to it. That's kind of important to the state, if not the country in some ways. And that's kind of true in terms of it being a huge tourist draw. People come here because it's a postcard perfect town. And that's both good and bad. So it's a complex and nuanced place as well. And it's a place that's so many things to many different people who don't live here, people who live here, etc. If we could go back to the, there, thank you. So I do agree with Bruce and Jeff that we're at a moment. It's been a long time since the code has been updated. So, and I don't think I heard people resisting that idea. I think people generally agree that a code update is needed. There are housing supply issues. People generally would like to make it easier to live here, for people to live here, which is, there's a lot in that statement. People are interested in setting a limit on maximum house size. People are interested in looking at more and smaller dwellings on a site as potentially a way of creating more housing stock. People are interested in, and let me just remind you, this is the people that I spoke with so far. This may not be true as we go through the project, but I'm giving you what I've learned so far. The role of the design review board, people are interested in seeing that increase. To what kind of what Jeff was talking about, should it be looking at houses in certain districts or corridors or certain proximity to the coast, to the beach, or to houses over a certain size? We would like to look at the variance criteria and processes because it sounds like it's used in different ways at different times. And people are anxious to have rules that are not subject to different interpretations. And there was a lot of discussion with me that the code language was written in a time where you were more innocent or naive about how people would tend to follow the rules and intended the best for Cannon Beach. And that's kind of changing. Development environment is changing. And so we need rules that are going to be really defensible. And then people said, we'd like to protect the village character and natural beauty. So I feel that that's kind of our order for this project. I think I have just a couple more slides. So a code audit is someone I interviewed said it's like when a school goes for accreditation. And I really like that description. It's a top to bottom assessment to see how are you performing? Are you meeting your mission? What is your mission? And are you doing it? And is the system working and delivering what it should? So we need to modernize the regulations, eliminate holes and patches, improve the way the entire system works. That's the way that the zoning code works, but the way that the land division code works and the way that it interfaces with the transportation system plan and wetlands delineation. And we also need to make sure that all the bodies that are doing different roles in the process are working kind of optimally together. And everybody thinks that there's an intention embedded in the comprehensive plan. And a lot of Jeff's presentation was about the gap, that there's intention in the comprehensive plan, but maybe the rules, the regulations don't actually support it. So you're going to lose something that we need to fix that. But I'm actually not sure that that intention is articulated in the comprehensive plan. However, we're not going to rewrite the comprehensive plan right now. We're going to kind of leapfrog over and make sure that the regulations work. So, and we need to revisit the vision, illustrate, test, and inspire. I think the last slide is just a little bit about our team. So I just want to, before I sit down and we open the conversation up, I'm an architect with several decades of experience, mostly in Oregon, although I worked in New York City for the early part of my career. And early on in my career, I graduated from the University of Oregon. Early in my career, I realized that I loved cities more than buildings. So I became an urban designer and I founded my company called Urbsworks. And we do a lot of code audits and amendments for cities. A lot of them include a form-based component. So as architects, we're constantly looking at not just words on the page, but the forms, the shapes of buildings and sites and textures of whole neighborhoods that they create. So we'll be bringing a lot of that to this project. We're joined, my team of Pauline and Erica, we're joined by Keith Leiden, who's a longtime planner, certified, who's been working in the state of Oregon for a number of cities as a contract planner. We've worked for small cities and large cities. And anyway, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about the next step of this process. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I will start us off here with the discussion about the dual track. Like I said, we brought before you guys the commission in a work session. We discussed the first three. Could put those back up, Rusty, if you don't mind. Mine there. Yeah, so it's the last slide there is fine, yeah. And so recombination of lots. I addressed that with some language to lot line adjustments. 2, limiting floor area ratios and lot coverages by going into each of the residential districts and tweaking the ratio and lot coverage. And even in the original draft that came to the Planning Commission for the work session, it did have a square footage cap to maximum square footage for homes. So it had a number in there and that progressed with the different zoning district sizes and the sizes of lots, instead of having, as in number 4 here, where they cap it at 3,500 across the board. And then 3, striking the plan development option. And so, as I suggested at the beginning of my talk, I would like to have feedback on, should we go through a 2-track process with an expedited track there? And if so, do you think we need to open it up to the 4th and 5th item, or?
I mean, my feeling is that number 4, it does more in terms of trying to keep the city as not a cottage necessarily building, but at least it addresses these oversized houses that we're seeing and combination of lots. So my feeling is that we should include 4 and 5. To me, it's like, I wish that would have come up a long time ago, because these houses that are being built on the oceanfront definitely are blocking off the view of houses in the neighborhood there. So my feeling is we should cover all 5 of those.
Do we raise our hand?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. I think it's important to have it be a two-tiered expedited process. And the reason I say that is a complete code audit is going to take a lot of time. And especially after hearing how many housing applications there were over the last year, that makes me even more firm in my belief that it's really important that we try and expedite these first 5 things on the list before you. As far as the limiting building heights along the oceanfront, I brought that up at the last meeting. I brought it up before. Arch Cape has that kind of limitation. And I honestly can't see any reason for us not to have that as well. Not just for the aesthetics of the town, but also because of what really set that off for me was a house on Pacific that was built. I think it's about 5,000 square feet. They combined, it was 2 lots combined so they could get over the floor area ratio that way and make a house that was that large on 2 combined lots. And it blocks either 2 to 3 houses that are just to the east of it, of any view they had before. And it looms over the street. And I walk by it all the time, and it's just heartbreaking to see it just looming over the street like that. And I started thinking about that and looking at Arch Cape as an example, because I knew they had an oceanfront limit. I don't understand what more you could want than the ocean in your front yard or as your front yard. And so I don't see it as a hardship in the least bit. And I think that it's very, very, very important that we limit, that 3,500 is just a number that was thrown out there. Of course, I personally would like to see it less, but I don't, there's other people who have other opinions, so we'll wait and see. But I think it's really important that we expedite it and get these things on the books before we go through this long process of a code audit, which will take a long time. And by then, how many more hundreds of applications will have gone through with no controls like these?
Yeah, I thought at the council level, we had already passed that decision. That's why we're here. We wanted to have the expedited for these top three that we identified. So I'm not sure why you're asking that question. I think the answer is yes. The question now may be, we want to add the last 4 and 5. And I have a question on how 4 and 2 relate to each other. They may be the same thing depending on how the language is finally drafted.
Could combine them, yeah.
Yeah, and Mike, I brought up earlier that, even my original draft that you guys had a look at as well, it had a cap to each district as well. It went up from, I think, like 3,000 to 3,500 to 4,000 to 500, depending on the districts. This one suggests it just caps it at a gross floor area for all of the residential. Then the 5th one, that came in, and like Lisa said at the last meeting, I can tell you we've received, Jim, what do you think, a dozen or so comments already, and we haven't really gone out with notice on this. So I do think that the majority of them involve the last 2 items. So
Yeah, Jeff, that was what I was going to say, is I count at least 15 people that have mentioned only the 18-foot restriction, or 14, however you want to say it. And because of that, I am a little concerned about maybe grandfathering in some way to, it just seems like there's some real concern, and I think we should listen to the public concern.
I think added to that, the height limit compounds a whole mess of problems when you run into changing a home that's already over that height.
Sure.
So you're going to have to create language or figure out ways to work out variances and the remodels and, the other thing is when you look at the ocean front, how many empty lots are there on the ocean front where this would directly affect? So every new instance is going to be a tear down or a remodel. And I suppose we could write it in a way that it doesn't affect anybody that's already got something, only the new constructions, but what good is that going to be? The other aspect of this, to me, is limiting height really limits design. You really, as a designer, you can play with things vertically better than you can just flat. You get a little bit of roof pitch, especially when you got a 14-foot average, pretty minimal what you can do with it. You're going to wind up with cookie cutter houses if we had spaces to even put them. So I really object to the height limitation. I would rather work out maybe some sort of, I've read in the past, and I know when we were studying this to do the original criteria for the design review, how to create difference between the neighborhood. Both this kind of difference, this kind of difference. So people would have front porches next to somebody who's got a jut out and somebody else has got this maw of a garage. So you had variety within a neighborhood rather than boom, 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 all the same.
Yeah, Sam,
Right.
may I jump in here?
Jump right in.
Yeah, this is Mike Morgan. I agree with you. I think the idea of 18 feet will cause every future house to be built that still can be built to be basically a flat roof, with a very slight pitch. And I think a design requirement on the ocean front would be, and I'm speaking for myself, not the DRB, but I think a design criteria for new houses is preferable to just a strict limitation on building height. I think in most cases, building height limitation on the ocean front is going to please the people that are one house back, but it's not going to have that much of an impact, 2 or 3 or 10 houses back, unless it's a very sloped neighborhood. The other thing is, in Tolovana, I can count on one hand the number of cottages that will inevitably be torn down or crunched, and new houses put in its place, just like the one that's going on at Coos right now that's got a lot of people all worked up. But it's this would be limited to such a small number of properties. I think it's just not gonna have much of an effect. I really would urge the council to think about, and the planning commission to think about, using the design review board to come up with some criteria that can review oceanfront houses, oceanfront remodels, houses along Hemlock over a certain square footage, and houses in other prominent locations. I also like the idea of the option 3 that allows structures based on the square footage of the lot rather than a flat 3,500 square feet or 5,000 square feet or whatever. I'd also like to say that the plan, getting rid of planned development, I think is not a good idea. I think the only place that I can think of where planned development would really work based on the amount of land that's available would be Southwind. And if we ever get around to developing some affordable housing down there, or a mixture of commercial or institutional and housing, the planned development process is designed for something like that. So I think throwing out, the PD section is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So that's my pitch.
I'll
May I jump in?
have to disagree with that because it created all kinds of nightmare for us. And if you're looking at Southwind, we can look at that through our subdivision codes. And we do not need this planned development option because first of all, in its current form, it's a nightmare. And as Mike said, you can't think of any other places. Well, I guarantee you, there are places and that we think were unbuildable. The one Nicholson's was too steep to build on, and look what happened. 4 units went in there. And so the planned development option does not work in this town. So let's just be done with that. And if something comes up that needs development, let's work with that site specific.
And there's lots of code changes that can be made that would allow for affordable housing without having a planned unit developments continue anymore. And also I'd like to disagree with Mr. Morgan about the idea of having a limit on the height on the ocean front. For the cookie cutter idea did not happen where they have it in Arch Cape. If you go down, drive down to Arch Cape sometime and drive around the ocean, drive down the ocean front, they are not cookie cutter houses, all with flat roofs. There's all different kinds of architecture down there. A good architect can design a beautiful, interesting, creative, single-story house or 18 house with an 18-foot peak. So I don't buy that at all. And nobody said it was going to be easy. Of course, you'd have to have lots and lots of thinking about how you do this so that people who are grandfathered in, if they need to make a remodel on their house or over a certain percentage, how that would work. But we can do that. There's not, just because it's difficult and we have to think it through, we have planners to help us with that. And I don't think we can anticipate at this point what will happen along the ocean front. I don't think we can anticipate what lots will end up, how people will get around certain limitations on lots and build big houses. So it's not just the people on just to the east of those on the ocean front who are affected. I think the whole town is affected because the aesthetics of the town are very much impacted by these humongous 5,000 square foot tall houses along the ocean front. It gives the ocean front an entirely different look. And when you're walking down the street and when you're on the beach. So
I think that's a point I wanted to make, Lisa, is the view from the beach, I think isn't one we often talk about, but more people look from the beach to town than from the second row of houses back forward. So Frank Lloyd Wright, one of America's most famous architects, believed houses should seamlessly blend into their environment. So one level houses can be done. And I don't know that a 14-foot average and an 18-foot peak is the way to address it. It seems like the intent there is to make them single level houses. I think Mr. Morgan made a decent point about people putting a bunch of flat roofed houses on there. But if the intent is just to keep them single level and to keep the height down, it may address itself. You're not going to put 2 levels in 18 feet, an 18-foot peak. And also, Mr. Morgan mentioned the design review board having a more active role. I think that's pretty critical, not only on the ocean front but across the city. And lastly, as has been said multiple times, this is going with a 14-foot, 18-foot peak is not going to affect most lots in many of our lifetimes. So it's really just setting a precedent for future generations. Yes, there's a few lots that could be affected, will be affected, but it's not going to immediately take effect, but it will protect the character of this community for generations to come. That's all I have to say.
I would like to kick off with something that Mike mentioned about design review. And I know you mentioned it for the oceanfront, but also along Hemlock. I would expand that to almost community-wide. I don't see any reason to try and sort out where are the avenues that we want to be more attentive to. I don't think that's necessary. What I would do, though, is really look at a size and say design review kicks in at X amount of gross square footage. The size to use would be determined. Let's say 2,000. If any home, and what we need to do, I think, as a body here is really figure out what is our ideal. What is the ideal home? You know, either on the oceanfront or back in East Presidentials, who knows? Generally, we have 5,000 square foot lots. You wind up around 2,600 square foot max, somewhere around in there with your floor area ratio. If 2,000 is a nice size home that we would expect, guessing here, anything at 2,000 or larger kicks into design review. That's going to cover a lot of new homes. And it gives us much more control. And it also maybe makes the designers and the new homeowners think, okay, if I do 1999, I don't have to do all that extra stuff. I think a little peer pressure might help. That's an idea. Just throwing it out.
Could I throw in one more comment? Not to be, chatty Cathy here, but if you are going to restrict home sizes, I think everybody is alarmed at the fact that we've dropped 12 or 14% population. And there must be a way to incentivize ADUs. Well, first of all, I really think you need to take ADUs away from design review. I think that goes without saying, but I think that you can incentivize ADUs by building it into how many square feet of gross floor area you're allowing. I think Joe Burnt's house might be an example, with I don't know, I'm not, for sure that Joe would agree with me, but allowing a house to have more square footage and lot coverage if they have an ADU, and the ADU can be, it has to be an enforced ADU, not an STR. So I would really like to throw that into the pot. Thank you.
I don't understand that, Mike, though. Are you saying that you allow for bigger houses if you have an ADU? So not only do you have the increased coverage on the lot from the ADU, but you have a big, gigantic house too? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think I'm not talking about gigantic. I think say 3,500 square feet. You could have, 35 or say 3,000. You could go up to say 3,750 or 4,000.
That's a huge house.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's the way, that's what people are doing these days. But
that doesn't mean we want it.
Let me finish, Lisa. So I'm just throwing out the concept. I'm not talking about exact numbers here, but if you want to encourage ADUs, which is probably the only way that I can see in the near future that we're going to have any kind of affordable rentals in this town that's quickly becoming like Hilton Head. You know, we've got to figure out ways to promote affordable housing. I mean, you're not just, you know, we built Elk Creek Terrace. We built Elk Creek Terrace back in the 90s. Shorewood came along 10 years later, and nothing has happened since then. So somebody's got to get creative and try to figure out how the young baristas and bartenders are gonna live in this town. So there you go.
I agree, but I don't think you have to, the incentive doesn't have to be build a bigger house. The incentive is you, by putting an ADU on your property, you achieve some revenue for yourself from that ADU. So I think that's a good enough incentive. I don't think you have to increase the incentive to have a bigger house.
I think the challenge with an ADU then becomes someone could probably make more money on a short-term rental basis without a license than they could renting. I mean, we still have an affordability issue that we really haven't gotten down to the brass tacks as to what is affordable. So is this about more housing stock, or is this about more housing that the local people who work at the restaurant can afford? I think if you came in and you started to incentivize people to build even more densely, but that there was some tie-in to affordable housing at some level of median family income, that would meaningfully address affordability. But otherwise, we're just making more rental units, short-term rental units in the city, which we don't need more.
I'm going to add to this a little bit. I'm going to work off of Mike's idea, but not necessarily for his reason of an ADU. My reasoning would be to look at it as far as structure size. If we had a maximum, number 4 on our list here says 3,500 square feet as a maximum. I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just saying this is a number. If somebody were to build a 3,500 square foot lot, 3,500 square foot building on a lot, that's a huge building. But if they built 2 1,600 square foot buildings, you got 2 smaller buildings, which fits the aesthetic better, even though they're kind of packed together and it would be a little tight. There is an aesthetic ability there. So I think where I would take Mike's idea of giving a little bit of square footage bonus to the person who does 2 structures rather than 1 huge one, that has merit. If one of them turns out to be an ADU, that's an added bonus as far as I'm concerned. ADU and rentals, I think, is a whole nother conversation I know we're going to have pretty soon about, because short-term rentals is another issue. Aside from this, these 5 items, for us to be on the fast track, I agree with Mike that 2 and 4 are the same topic as far as I'm concerned, because I think when we start working out how floor area ratio and lot coverage could be redesigned so it's a heck of a lot more clear, it's a really difficult issue, and you plug it into these different calculations and you come up with something. Build into that the restriction of a maximum size, whether that be a generic maximum size for the whole community or whether it be fit the different lot sizes. I don't know. We can talk about that. I think those are the same topic.
I want to, Sam, before you finish with your thought, I don't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I want to frame what I was saying about the ADU in a different way. How many nights a month can someone rent without any kind of license their home?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
No, 1 month, 30 days.
30 days.
30
yeah,
days.
30 days. Sorry.
30, sorry. So in a calendar month, how many times can I rent my house out without needing any license?
You can only rent long-term, Clay.
Short term.
Over
Short term.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear
Under
me?
30 days. Under 30 days. I want to rent it out to someone vacationing in Canton Beach.
You can,
Yeah, so you can only do it twice.
no,
Every, every 14 days.
You still have to have a permit for that.
Need a permit.
Yeah, but you have to have a permit.
Yeah,
How many days do I need to not have a permit?
You can
30.
have-
You have to rent it longer than 30 days.
correct.
So I can't rent my house at all unless I have a permit, short term.
No, I think you can rent it for a weekend, but you can't rent it to anybody else for a month. Basically,
Without a permit.
you're renting without a permit,
I thought
you
it-
can rent for a 30-day period. 30 days is longer. But the problem is,
That's short term.
well, I know, I'm-
You have to have,
30 days or longer is long-term.
right,
And if you have somebody staying there 30 days or longer, that's long-term. I think the question is, if you say, I'm going to rent it for 30 days, but the people that are renting only stayed there a weekend, what is that? Is that a short-term rental? No,
A 30-day.
it's still a 30-day rental. It's still a long-term. The people just left, but you can't turn around and rent it again. Is
So
that,
and Sam, you might be spot on, Mike, you might be spot on with the idea that more housing on a lot creates more units and thereby more affordability. My concern is this: if in 3 days a month, I can rent my house for $400 a night, that's $1,200. What am I going to get for a long-term rental besides a long-term tenant in my house, which I don't want because I'm just talking in a third person here, which I don't want because I vacation in the home. So the practicality of what we're talking about, the economics of what we're talking about are what I'm concerned about. I don't know that I'm right in terms of the map. It's something I think we should consider before thinking that adding more housing stock is going to make our city more affordable for the people that live here, or rather we're just going to add more vacation rentals.
Well, I think if we start talking about ADUs when we actually get to that topic, we should definitely talk about restricting any ADUs to long-term rentals or ownership within the deed, and completely restrict or completely prevent any short-term rentals whatsoever. We've got plenty of short-term rentals. We don't need any more, and we don't want ADUs becoming short-term rentals like they have in the past.
That's my concern. There may be a way to address it, but my concern is it'll just, people will figure out how to manipulate it so that they can run them short term.
and the question again is, what is affordable? I mean, I can't see 600, 750 is about, I would think, what a service person makes and could pay. I don't think much more than that really works for them.
Well, sadly, that doesn't even reflect what affordable rent actually is right now.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's more 1,200 to 1,500.
Yeah.
If I'm making $35,000 a year and I allocate 30% of my income to housing, that's $875 a month.
Yeah. Yep.
I can make that in 2 nights renting my house.
Mhm.
that's why there's no affordable housing.
That's right.
The economics don't work.
Yeah.
Alicia?
Have the council or planning commission ever examined other alternatives or incentives for affordable housing through the state or through the county, through tax programs, other ways to incentivize intensity of the development, ADUs to be used for affordable housing? I mean, has that been explored?
That's not correct. We did talk about incentivizing affordable housing by allowing higher building as long as it was deed restricted and increased lot coverage. It was not supported by the entire council, although I myself did support it. And I would definitely support anything like that in the future. I think that's something that needs to be looked at if you truly are interested in providing affordable housing. You're going to have to look at some trade-offs with density.
And I think there are financial incentives available if there's a willingness to go down that path.
And the planning commission brought it up at the beginning of COVID that we would start looking at those type of options. And then COVID hit. But Dr. Brandon also, at one time, they did the park trailer concept or whatever tiny home type concept. You guys also looked at that prior to my time as well, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, I think that, since I've been here 3 years, just prior to that, they had looked at a couple of different concepts.
We were actually ready to move on the tiny home concept at the RV park to the point we were actually looking at actual tiny homes, visiting sites and beginning to look at the layout. And the state changed the law right in the middle of it, where you could no longer trailer a tiny home in. It violated all Oregon laws for transporting, trailering buildings. And just said, we don't know any other way to do it. They said it can't be on wheels. It's got to be on a firm foundation. It's got to be tied in, hardwired. And that drove the cost up. And it didn't look like it was any longer going to be affordable.
And the fire codes were changed as well, so it also
Yeah.
made it even more
Oh,
expensive.
yeah. You couldn't have them sleep in a loft like most tiny homes are. And it had to be sprinkled. I mean, they changed, they did everything they could to kill that idea.
That
What's a
That has grown back. So that is a little different now. Need to relook at those.
Yeah, I think
details.
good.
Who was that speaking?
This is Joe Byrne.
Joe, go ahead.
It strikes me as kind of odd that the state of Oregon licenses vacation trailers, and they're drug all over the state.
It is very odd. It's the whole tiny home argument is a really bizarre one. And it is constantly in flux. There is quite an organization in the state that has been tweaking it and getting some advance. They're running from what I read, and I try and keep up on this. The state has tried to shuffle all of their regulatory off onto ODOT, so it's all ODOT's problem. Meanwhile, the fire marshal does not like tiny homes, so he's doing everything he can to kill them. That's changing because the legislature kind of told him, put their thumb on him a little bit. I don't have all the details, but it is a little more viable now. And we should look into that. Again, that's a little different topic than what we're trying to consider today. And I think in the fact that when we get into the second phase, the full-on code audit, we should really focus on how we want to address tiny homes, mobile homes. There's a whole rack of names that they call all kinds of structures, ADUs and all that kind of stuff. Alicia.
The only place that I think it really relates to the conversation right now is that idea of, do you go with an absolute value, 3,500 square feet max, or do you go with something that's scalable based on the lot size? And I think if you're trying to incentivize ADUs or some other kinds of ideas, that flexibility that you have with different lot sizes, depending on different areas of the city. I mean, my little 2,000 square foot lot would not be the place that you want to incentivize any more development, but there are other places where there are larger parcels or maybe outside of the presidential streets or whatever, where it might make a lot more sense to allow a little bit more intense development or a little bit larger development, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And so I guess with my background, I like to see some flexibility and some interpretation and some guidelines rather than an absolute. I feel the same way about the idea of the oceanfront. I agree with Mike that we could end up with an unintended consequence where everybody goes with that 18-foot average, single story flat roof, which I don't think would be the design we're looking for. At least in my experience, most of the oceanfront properties, a lot of them that I remember from my childhood already were 2 stories. And it would be unfortunate for someone not to be able to rebuild if they lost a home, if there was a fire or whatever. It would be unfortunate for them not to rebuild but I'd rather see flexibility than absolutes in both cases.
Right.
I'd like to add a comment about the 18 or the 14-foot roof lines on the oceanfront. It seems to me that if we were a little more rigid about setbacks for side yards, we would manage without having some 3,500 square foot limitation. We would have space between the houses that, you know, if you have 5 foot setbacks on the sidelines, there's not a lot of, you know, it gives you 10 feet and you plant a tree in the way, and, you know, you lose the contact with the ocean. And it seems to me that encouraging people not to build from lot line to lot line, which we often find ourselves doing when people appeal to the planning commission to get a variance on the lot, the size of the lot. If we were more rigid about keeping at least those 5 foot restrictions on the sidelines, houses would be smaller.
You know, if you just limited or capped the total square footage, floor area, square footage, then a person has a choice of making a smaller footprint and having a taller building, or having a lower building. But, you know, it's almost, it's looking at the mass. I think part of the problem is the mass of these structures.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
when it goes property line to property line and takes advantage of the 28 foot, it has filled up all view space. But if you had this cap on, say, I don't know, 3,500, somebody could still build, you know, I'll use numbers easier to move. Say the 4,000 square foot. Somebody can build one that only has a 2,000 square foot footprint and make it 2-story. Or they can have a single story, 4,000 square feet. That's where you get some flexibility. If you then put in some architectural design standards, you can't take a box and call that an aesthetic approved house. But you have the profile, I think, becomes as important as the total square footage. So if you have a combination of the mass of the building, and they can make it taller and skinnier, or they can make it shorter and fatter, but then you still want to make sure you don't just have flat top boxes and require that it have a pitched roof, that it has bay windows, that it has enclosed covered porches, that, you know, it has more than 4 corners. That alone will do a lot. So I think there's a lot to be done by getting the design review board more involved in this.
Can I ask a question of our planner, of the herbs work person? I looked to see, I tried to find cities where design review boards could make regulations for residential homes. And I haven't found one yet. Is that common, or does that happen?
My understanding is it has to be clear and objective, but it can be administered by a body. It could be a design review board, but the standards have to be clear and objective for needed housing. If a design guidelines path is provided, it has to be a second alternative path. And that's has to do with the needed housing rule from the state. And Jeff is nodding, so I think I'm correct.
I can also add a little to that. When we did the original criteria for our design review, we copied a lot of our wording from Breckenridge, Colorado. And at that time, we were researching a whole bunch of other places, trying to figure out what is a design review board. And we found out there were very many places at that time. This was in the 80s, 90s, somewhere around there. And Breckenridge did design at that time, reviewed everything. down to outhouses. They reviewed everything. And we decided that was going to be way too much for us to handle. And we were totally focused on the downtown aesthetic at the time and decided not to challenge or make that a potential challenge of the homeowner, the residential concern. So that's neither here nor there as far as what we were doing, but I know there are a lot of other places. I think Carmel does. I know Monterey does.
Sam,
Yeah, Mike?
a little closer to home, a little closer to home is Astoria in their historic districts. If you're in a historic district, any alteration whatsoever, any new construction or alteration is reviewed by the Historic Landmarks Commission.
Yeah.
So to Lisa's point about can single family homes be reviewed? Yes, they can.
I'm not talking about historic districts. I know about that. I'm talking about in the entire city. Can you do that in a whole city?
I think so.
I think we can. And there's another place to look for examples, and that is homeowners associations. They do that all the time with their design standards. So it can be done.
Yeah, and I think,
Encouraged to do it.
yeah, I think it's also, there's different techniques which I've talked about, form-based code or a design guideline. So there's a range of techniques to use when you do this. And yes, I think you can have different scales or granularities depending on which districts you want to apply that to. For instance, the current DRB language is really written for new big or new commercial structures. It doesn't really speak that well to, as we found out at the DRB level, when people are just making kind of minor changes to their buildings or minor revisions. It doesn't really speak to that. So there are different ways to do this, and I know there's interest, at least from talking to the DRB and Planning Commission over the years, that and others I think are really interested in applying this more broadly, or the DRB applied more broadly.
I think
Well,
that,
I mean, an obvious place to look is our own guidelines for what cute touches we have to put onto houses. We have, bump outs and porches and decks and
Dormers.
yeah, and it, it's had a huge impact, and it's just a few minor restrictions. I mean, you have to have 3 of those things someplace on what you build here. And
They'll end up with that big purple house downtown across from the church. So even with our restrictions, I mean, that fit into the restrictions, obviously, and look at it.
I bet an architect, an architectural firm could help us describe in language what a village character is, or what a cottage look is. But they learn all kinds of styles as they go to school. We get specify and we get help on what you can do.
Yeah.
But
well,
you can
don't you
describe
think that
what
don't you
maintains
think
this
that what-
character. Yeah.
don't
I
you
do
think
think
that what
that-
we do in Cannon Beach is say if we let 1,000 flowers bloom, we'll end up with a kind of interesting little village character.
Chairman Mao,
Pardon?
wasn't that Chairman Mao?
More or less. Probably less than more, but I think it's pretty interesting just how kitsched up houses are as a result of, pick 3 of these and put them in your house someplace, and you don't have to worry about design review and so forth, or the color that you paint the house. or whether you put biblical, sayings on the side of your house or whatever. I mean, I think there's a kind of individuality to a village, you got your village idiots, and Cannon Beach has its history of village idiots. And there's a lot of effort to suppress those idiots now, but it has a history of individualism and artistry of sorts that, and some of it, in terms of the architecture of the town, I think goes back to that one basic thing and the guidelines for building a house in Cannon Beach in terms of bump outs and porches and doodads. And people have made houses look more cottagey than they might have if those rules weren't there.
Just below the purple house is a quite attractive house, possibly done by the same developer. And so, you've got two, contrasting styles. But I think that if the purple house had come to DRB, we probably would have, asked them to make some changes.
Yeah,
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Well, we could simplify this whole thing. And that is, we should just make all of Cannon Beach an historic district.
There you go.
yeah. Plant a spruce
Sorry,
tree.
what you wish
I
for.
like that. That's great. Would that we could.
Let me bring this around to back to Jeff's list. We haven't discussed it all, and I think there's a reason, but we haven't discussed item number 1 at all, which is the combination of lots. And I believe we haven't discussed that because it's so freaking obvious.
But we have to make a decision on that.
I think we should.
All in favor?
I think you should comment on it. The one thing that I was reading, and I read it wrong, and I can't find it right this minute, but it also had some wording about cutting up a lot. If somebody had a 10,000 square foot lot, there's a couple of them up here in presidentials. What if they said, I would like to chop it up? Personally, I think that's a go. I wouldn't limit that at all.
Yeah, it's not intended to do that, if that's what you're saying. Yeah, it's not, it's not intended to limit any kind of subdivision that's, fits the lot size criteria and things like that.
Okay. I suppose to me, I would also, and not necessarily in the urgent category, but in the later category of code, is to relook at minimum lot size. If you can build it, I would say do it. A really good obvious thing is the young man who is up on Ecola Park Road that's building a little triangular building. That to me is the perfect ideal of what I would like to see a lot of our less buildable lots start doing, is having that kind of creativity.
Well, that kind of creativity also allowed them to ignore setbacks on two sides.
And I think we need that flexibility because
I certainly voted against that project. And I had good reason for, because I compared the entrance into Ecola State Park with an entrance that you're going into and that you're coming out of an urban setting. So I was totally against that project. So anyways, but wouldn't you know, City Hall Council turned it over.
We did.
Yeah. And when I went up there and looked at what he was doing up there, which isn't much yet, but I realized that just to the east and up the hill a bit, there's 5 big lots right up there that are, 3 of them are just sold or something like that. Dale. So what we're gonna have is a cute little house and 5 big houses right behind it. If the cute little house was incentive to put a bunch of little houses up on that hill, to me, that's more attractive. In the character that we're trying to define. So, I don't know. There are a lot of empty spaces still around. They're hard to find. They are on hills and in valleys and in wetlands. I think we need to address those so that they can be done to some extent to fit better. Because people, what our culture right now wants is big purple homes. For some dumb reason, the culture that's coming to build a new home wants that. Now, I disagree totally with myself sometimes because the cute little house just below it on Taft is a totally different animal. That was very well done. I wish that had happened on the upper lot and a smaller house on the lower lot. So, and they just saved the plum trees, but oh well. The history of that area was an orchard, a plum orchard for a bajillion years. Anyhow. Where are we at, Jeff? What else do you need?
Really just, I think item 5 is the one that is, I think we're set for 1 through 4, but should I go to notice for all 5 or? I don't see a true consensus developing in that.
Jeff, one thing I was hoping we could do is to select maybe 25 properties that we felt were ones that we weren't pleased with having happened. And just do the metrics that you've provided for us to see if we put these metrics to use, if it actually would in fact make a difference to those homes.
What about, on the flip side of that, what about the 25? You guys had talked about defining your ideals or what you want to see, what about the flip side? What are the 25 homes?
Well, why don't we do both? But like the purple house, get that one. Why don't we like it? Because it's too big and it took out all the trees. And
it's purple.
And it's purple, by the way, but I don't know if we can. To it. But the one thing is if we used our metrics now, would it actually be a smaller house and by how much?
The proposed language is what you're saying.
Yes, and also the Ramsey house that I'm thinking of, which you guys are all talking about, where they joined the lots. Can you show us some examples of what is being proposed and how that actually would make a difference for us?
And you can do a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Now that you got it.
I've already done it. Yeah.
But I think it's good to look at the flip side too.
I agree.
Right. We have, much more than 25 houses that we're very pleased.
And it'd be nice to be positive. I realize that. Yeah. But what went wrong? Why?
Yeah, that's a good.
And if our metrics are accurate, because in some cases I didn't think they were. I didn't think they made a difference. So.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
All right.
I did not hear your thinking on the 5th item. You said you felt that, items 1 through 4 go ahead with, but I did not hear how you wanted to address that 5th item that's up there.
Claire, you talking to me?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I was asking you guys to, what is the consensus on the 5th item? Are we going to go forward with that? To me, the oceanfront building height is the one, that we have, I think, received the most comments on already, and we haven't really noticed for it. from a staff perspective, I think it's going to slow everything down. And I don't know if you're going to expedite anything if we go into that. It is not like you're not going to get a second chance at that with this code audit. If you guys want to eventually do an oceanfront setback limit or any building height limit and not go through a DRB process as an alternative, you can do that during this code audit experience over the next year and a half. I've asked for an expedited few items that we feel rather confident that, at least we can get good public input on and feedback and move forward with those items. And like I said, with each one, you kind of expose more sides to critique and debate. And with that adds delay and delay and delay. I just know from our experiences, just to get any ordinance through is a fairly lengthy process. And so that's what I'm asking to a consensus on number 5. My recommendation would be is to drop number 5 until we do the full code audit. You'll get to talk about it then, and move forward with the first 4 items.
In order to go, if it means getting the first 4 items through at this time or trying to, I think that's a good idea, Jeff. I would just ask that before anybody, in thinking about number 5 in the future, to take a drive and look at some places where they do have that kind of limitation on oceanfront homes and see what you think. Because, the flat roof thing and the scenarios that have been painted, I have not seen that happen in areas that have done this. So I'm just asking that, keep an open mind about it. But I think if it's going to hold everything up that much, I think you also have to ask yourself, who is complaining? Hey, Vinny, stop it. Who is complaining?
That was worth the whole meeting right there.
He's squeaking his toy. Who is complaining? Is it a bunch of wealthy people?
Places that you should drive through is Surf Pines, because on oceanfront, it can be a 13-foot height restriction. It can be 14, it can be 15. It's all different kinds. And there have been some very creative houses built there to accommodate them. Yes, there are some flat houses too. But I think it's kind of interesting to drive through there and see what they have come up with.
Yeah, and also I do ask, who is doing the complaining? Is it wealthy people who want to build a huge house? Is it people who already have a 2-story house and they're worried about if they want to remodel, because that can be addressed in the code?
The people that I read that were concerned were people who were worried that if there was a fire, they couldn't rebuild their house.
That can be, I get that, but that can be accommodated in the code. You can make, you can make exceptions for people who are grandfathered in if they want to rebuild. That's not difficult to do. I'm talking mostly about new construction here.
Well, my objection, Lisa, my objection is that the horse has already left the barn. There are so few available lots. So you're going to, and I don't like the 5,000 square foot house either. I think it's huge and out of place. But a well-designed 2-story house that might pass DRB muster on the few lots that are still available is not going to make any difference in the world. You're just going to,
Yeah, we should look at all of the alternatives.
Yeah, I think the putting a limit on this gross square footage will go a long way toward addressing that height issue. And crowded.
And DRB review.
Yeah, I think also this is an example of the fact that this last little, exactly why Jeff wants to postpone it. I would do it into the second phase of our code discussion, just because there's a lot of bits to this. And I think let's get the first 4 and 2 and 3 combined, so that's 3 now. So go ahead, Bruce.
This happened in the community I was involved with last, and I would strongly urge that you don't do anything that would impact the schedule of item 1, because that's going to impact this community more than anything else. The area that you've got a bunch of small houses, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 of them got bought, knocked down, and then you got a big building in the middle. So that's one that can really change the character. And I would urge you to make sure that that one stays on the fast track, even if some others drop off. I wouldn't hold that up in any way.
So when you say fast track, can we wrap this, the ones that we want to urge through by the end of the year?
Well, it's scheduled to go before you guys in October. We will start the public notice as soon as this meeting's over for those first 4 items.
But the city council also has to have.
Sure. So as soon as you guys pass your language, it will go before the city council, likely for a work session as we normally do, and then can be passed at the following.
But the October one is the only one that the planning commission will have open hearings?
That's up to you guys,
Okay.
how you want to schedule that.
Oh, okay.
We've done it in the past where, like Fort manager might want to just come to you guys with the traditional of first public hearing, continued if you want to for another one. And then you guys pass it on to the city council. But like at Fort management, we held a series of, 5 hearing sessions. And so, at each level, we have the discretion of, as long as we do what's required in our code, which is 1 before each. So we can talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, our experience with the planning commissions, we've been talking about this for months already.
Right.
So I'm thinking we want to have a public hearing to satisfy that need and move on.
Yeah, exactly. That's my impression too, Daryl. Thank you.
Okay.
Is one of the things we've been hung up in is the size. Is 3,500 the number? Or are we going to kick that around? I mean, we have really been stuck on that number. Not that number, but we have been stuck on trying to figure out what the magic number is.
Well, I mean, the floor ratio requirement, I think, addresses that quite well. But the 3,500 came about. Of course, I was more in favor of a 3,000 limit, but so be it.
Well, one of the things that caught my attention, Jeff, when you opened, you said lot coverage and FAR were 2 of the more confusing sections of our code. We're trying to clean our code up. I think we need to get something that makes this infinitely clear in the short term, and then in the long term, we can get more complicated, like an FAR code that has some teeth in it. So I think the best way to do it is to come up with some kind of a number, have that for a couple of years until we can come up with something more complicated, because with a complicated or confusing FAR code, we will get ourselves right back into a mess.
Well, I think going gross square footage and dropping this arcane term of floor area ratio, which I think it's really, people really confused, certainly confuses
I totally
me.
agree with that. I think gross square footage is the thing to concentrate on. And the throw out the floor area ratio.
The one thing too, I'd want to add to it would be a loft. I didn't see anything in there that added square footage with a loft. And I think that was a big issue and problem we had recently.
Well, in relationship to the planned unit development, in a home where something like that fits the scale, it's not an issue.
But also
But we get rid of.
in calculating, I'm not sure if I get this right, Jeff, but I think in calculating open space in 2-story rooms, there is a number that if the wall is higher than
15 feet.
Then it becomes a
It
second.
becomes 2 stories.
Okay.
So yeah, you have to calculate that, and we can tweak that up a little bit if we need to.
Yeah, and that's what I think. I mean, if we stick with the 4 items that are before, it's like I've said, we get to go back and revisit all of that language in the code audit process, and we can define those much better through that process. and give you guys alternatives on how to look at that. And that's difficult stuff. It's not something that we can get in an expedited format. And that's what worries me. I don't want to start digging into those details. I think that's why even the original text that I gave you guys, it had the trying to limit it by tweaking the ratios of the floor area and lot coverage, but it had the maximum gross floor area as a limit. So you're at least introducing that as a concept, and then we can come back and look at that.
Let's not lose sight. What we're trying to do, I think, is to keep these mansions from popping up on any lot, regardless of the size of the lot. So
Exactly.
I'd see a smaller scale building, not just because you have a bigger lot, you build a bigger house. So that's again why I like the idea of a maximum allowable gross square footage, regardless of how large it is. Matter of fact, as the lot gets bigger, that's because you're in a less dense zone.
Mhm.
And by keeping that house smaller with a cap on it, you have created a less dense neighborhood. You can't keep letting the house get bigger and bigger because the lot gets bigger and bigger. It's not less dense. So again, that's why I'd like to see it stay with a capped, and 3,500 sound like
My
3,000.
I like 3,000 better.
my only concern, and this comes from kind of working in the industry of designing and talking to people who design homes, is when you have a maximum, that's the goal.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, that's the goal. A floor area ratio kind of grew. But, so if you got a 4,000 square foot home and I'm looking at 3,500 square feet, I'm going to stuff in as much as I can. That's the way people think. It's disappointing to me because a cute little cottage to me is much more preferable. But that's not what the current culture drives. So again, it's great when you get into the larger lots. Like Mike says, if you got a big lot, you got 3,500 square feet as a maximum, that's what you're gonna get. I would rather figure out a way that you have a maximum, say, 2,000 square foot. And if you want more, it's gotta be a separate building. So you get that breaking it up somehow. I don't quite know how to word that. I don't know how to, mandate that, but.
Sam, I do think that those are things that we should evaluate and look at when we do the full code. I think that is exactly, I think it came up earlier with incentives for certain things. Those are types of incentive structures. And whether you go, I've mentioned over the last few years, things like that. There's all kind of incentive structures that you can build into this where the city gets some things like Clay talks about affordable housing and things like that. Those kind of things can be built into those kind of things with form-based code. So and the DRB and review. So, but that's a longer process. And, I look forward to having those discussions, but to get something like Daryl said through by Christmas, I just don't see anything like that.
And I agree. And I would also agree with sticking to a lesser number than 3,500, just because it kind of puts a moratorium on those big ones until we figure it out.
Well, the thing that you really have to look at if you're going to be building two buildings, 2,000 square feet, you're going to have 2 parking spaces for each of those houses too. So.
Yeah, and there's all those kinds of discussions we need to. Do we need 2 parking?
Yeah, I've heard several people say 3,000 square foot cap was more appealing.
I agree. I like the 2,000 square foot idea, but I don't think that's the part that people.
Let's bring 2,000 out. Let city council deal with the pitchforks and flames.
Yeah, but I think 3,000 is a good compromise in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, does anybody here have more than 3,000 at home?
I'm sure Joe does.
That's
I got half that much.
less than half.
So
I've less than half.
we can begin the process, like you said, like Clay said perfectly, you guys can in that as we go through the process. So I will begin notice for an October hearing on the planning commission for the 4. I'll turn over to Marcy to kind of walk you through the next question.
Okay.
But
Thank you all.
going to 3,000? What, I mean, 2,000?
Last,
I think that's discussion to come, isn't it?
Going once, going twice.
We were just trying to get some hints.
We'll discuss it at the next meeting.
You can have my vote.
Okay.
May find a reason that number doesn't work, but
Yeah, but I mean, really, if you realistically look at houses, people that live in houses down here are really,
well,
it's about 2,000,
3,000
if
is.
you want,
1,000 square feet, 3 bedroom, 2 bath.
and if you want affordable housing, you want 2 buildings, 1,500 square feet. Or 1,000 or 2,000. I mean, that's still.
That'd be true.
Marcy.
Let's let Marcy wrap up this meeting. I'm just going to announce that you've given us good feedback. Jeff's got his orders for the October process to start. And given that we're going to fast track these items, that will probably take a lot of our effort for the rest of the year. So we'd like to plan to have joint sessions starting again in January for the whole code audit. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. And also, because there was a lot of discussion about the 4, and it's going to be going to planning commission next. My suggestion would be that we give Daryl and crew the ability to go ahead and say, well, we've got this input, and so maybe we'll drop this item off or something to move it forward, instead of having to come back to the group every time.
Yep.
So if they're going to be taking care of it, and so their judgment as far as what stays on, what doesn't, would be a suggestion.
Okay.
So you're saying take one at a time of the 4?
No, I'm saying that the 4 goes to them in October, and it may be that 1 gets an awful lot of comment. And so they might say, well, let's just move these 3 and kick that one back to this group.
Oh, okay.
But
And if we want to take up 5, we can.
I don't, if this group said 5 would be okay, so.
No, I'm just.
Yeah.
That wasn't even.
I know it wasn't funny.
I wonder he's the chair.
Last idea, or I want to discuss, Robin was talking about as far as creating a inventory of what we like and what we don't like. Would it make sense that if we picked a few examples and send you the address and you could sort that out after you have time?
Yeah. Let's put.
I think we ought to be real careful here.
Yep.
This is something that's gonna piss some people off.
Oh, wow.
I mean, really, we're stepping in here saying that we know better. We're sending that message out to all these people who have a stake in this game. And I don't know if we really want to say, this is the kind of house we're approving.
Joe, I second that, but with the caveat that I think we can accomplish what you guys are wanting by looking at, let's just say, if I chart the last 3 years of a new development, and we just look at those under these kind of guidelines, pick out those ones that kind of hit the limits of sizes and stuff like that. And we calculate that compared to the new ratios. Do these exceed? What don't they? That kind of thing. So I think, like Joe said, we're not saying, hey, these are the 25 we don't like. This just saying, this is from our recent construction. This is how many of them would go through under this current ordinance and others don't.
I like that idea better.
That's objective.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. Good.
Mr. Mayor, can I make one last comment? We've been talking a lot about how this meeting would go and, you know, how all this would work. And can't really see it, but I wrote a note to Jeff and Marcy, said, this is great. With 3 exclamation points, and Marcy added 3 more exclamation points. So thank you. I think that we're going to make some really great process.
You didn't add anything?
No, I thought he was talking about the Georgia win over.
Anybody that gets a chance to go by the modulaire, you'll notice that Jeff's end is all redone in orange and
Black and
red and black. I'm sorry.
I think the only change that we need to make is that Barb has to talk more.
I think we need to calm her down. Yeah. Yeah.
No. I thought maybe that was a gag.
I'll rip it up.
Okay, I guess that brings us to good of the order. I have nothing.
I do. One of the things I was wondering about, since we're going to be meeting on the 15th, is we had initially talked about having public input. And I know that our goal is to look at location sites and to talk about City Hall, but I really want to not miss the public piece, which needs to happen with this choice going forward.
I think the intent of the 15th was just for council to organize itself and decide where to go or what's next.
And then I hope we'll have another meeting for the public.
Sure. I mean, if that's how you want to move,
Yes,
that's your call.
because I think we promised many meetings and now all of a sudden, last night we kind of scooted in to get this meeting, and I just want to be fair to hear what other people think.
I guess I do have one little bit of the order, sort of. That Wednesday, I have a doctor's procedure late in the afternoon, so I might be a tad late. I might just get it started and I'll show up when I can. Okay? That, it shouldn't be that late. Anybody else?
Well, I just wanted to say that I've gotten a lot of feedback from citizens about beefing up our tree ordinance some more, making it less discretionary whether you have to replant, trees that you take down. And so I think that's something that will be coming up in the future too, that we really have to look at.
Good. Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
It was fun sitting next to you.